Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sunday service with me, Pastor Joseph Kahuho Katoto, Teens and Young Adults Pastor at Calvary Worship Center. Now, one thing that is sort of going around a lot right now is there's a lot of fear, a lot of worry, a lot of concern when it comes to the working of God. But I want us to really understand what we mean when we say we are looking to God. So we'll be looking at that particular term, God, and what that term God actually means. So when the Bible begins in the book of Genesis 1:1, it begins with the following statement. The very first statement we introduced to says that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now notice, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now what I want us to look at is the following. Let us understand that heavens and the earth are a byproduct of the action of God, because creating is an action. So they are a byproduct of the action of God, in that in the beginning God created. In other words, in the beginning God caused the heavens and the earth to be. So we get to see that everything that is has a cause, and that cause in this particular instance, based on that particular verse, is the person of God. Now, I've said person. Now, I want us to look a little bit into that. Now, when the Bible says in the beginning God created, we get to see in the book of Genesis chapter 1 that everything that God created through speaking. He called it out, he spoke it, and it was. So we find that everything was created with the frequency of God, with the frequency of God, and in the frequency of God, from the frequency of God, through the frequency of God, and therefore it is. Now, what I want us to comprehend is the following. Speech is only something that is common among beings, and as a result, we get to see that God is a person because he speaks. He speaks, it speaks, he speaks. And we get to see that in the beginning, he says that God created. Now, something that speaks cannot be referred to as an it. Rather, it can be referred to as a person, because in the beginning, this God, this being that is God, spoke and it was. Why am I saying being? Because persons are beings. Now, when you come on that, you get to understand something, that what God spoke was with meaning and therefore produced something, because meaning produces, and when God spoke, he spoke, and what he spoke was with meaning, and that which became was actually a reflection of the meaning that he spoke in what he spoke. Now we get to understand something, that the very words that God spoke, they brought life into something. So when God was speaking, those words that he was speaking were life and are life. Now, being that those words which he spoke produced life, produced something, caused something to come into being, and therefore giving it life, you realize then that God is the life of life. God is the life of life. So when we say in this particular sense that God, we mean the life of life as well, because every life is a byproduct of this person or being that is God. And therefore we get to understand that if life is as a result of life, then we also come to comprehend something else very interesting. That because this being is a thinking being, because he rationalized before he produced, because we get to see that he is very intentional in his writing of reality, in his producing of reality. Now, the reason I'm saying his writing of reality, this production of reality, is because you get to see in Genesis 1 that everything that is was produced. To cause to be is to produce. So we also get to understand something from that the person of God is intentional, because production in this particular sense in the book of Genesis chapter 1, when you look at it, it is very, very intentional, because the way that God outworks creation, the one he does something, the two he does something. Now we get the testament that he's a rational being. Now rationality referring to the ability to think or intelligence, and you also get to understand something by that. Now, if rationality has to do with the ability to think and the ability to comprehend and understand, then we get to realize that this being that is God, in stating God, we also mean the understanding of understanding. Now, the reason why I'm saying the understanding of understanding is because beings that are created or that were and are produced by the person of God, being angels and men, they have understanding. We think, and because we think we are, I think, therefore I am. So you get to understand something, that in this particular aspect, in the sense of him being the understanding of the understanding, means that God is also the mind of mind, being that understanding is a faculty of mind. By faculty, we mean an ability of mind, and the mind has faculties. The number one faculty of mind is understanding. The second one, we get to see the will. The third one, we get to see memory, and we also get to see imagination. Now, when you look at these, and we also get to see feelings as well, or emotions. Now, when you look at that, you get to understand something, that when we say that God is the mind of mind, we simply mean that each and every single faculties of the soul find their fullest expression in the person of God. They find their fullest expression in the person of God, meaning that God is the imagination of imagination, that He is that which has produced imagination, being also that creation was and is as a result of the imagination of God. Because when God spoke a lion into being, when God called a lion into being from the earth, He had seen the lion in His imagination before He produced it. Now that's something that we have to understand, which has to do with the law, with number one law of creation, which states the following, that before anything exists in actuality or in reality, it must first exist in the mind of God. Now, we also get to see something from that, that before anything exists in actuality, it must first exist in the mind of the Creator, this Creator being God. Now, what we get to understand is that reality being produced, it was produced by a reality, or the reality in this particular instance, because it takes reality to produce reality. By reality, we mean it takes something that is to produce something that was not, and therefore to cause it to be. So you get to understand something, that also when we are talking about God, we are also talking about the reality of reality. In other words, we are talking about the prime reality, the reality that has always been, the reality that is, and the reality that will be. And the reason for that is because we find out that, logically speaking, we cannot have an infinite number of uncaused causes. We can only have one uncaused cause, and this one uncaused cause is the one that we are introduced to in the book of Genesis, when the Bible says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. This beginning are not being the beginning of God, but this beginning being the beginning of creation. And this beginning that is the beginning of creation is the fact that simply just refers to the beginning of creation in the mind of God. Because remember what we have said, before anything exists in actuality, it must first exist in mind. So we get to see that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, which simply mean that in the beginning, that is to say, in the beginning of creation, in that place where creation began, that place where creation began, being the mind of God, everything was already created. And when God now begins to call things into being, He's calling into being that which He had already created in His mind and had already ordained in mind, and now He was just ordaining in actuality. Now, you have to understand that God is the reality of reality, that His reality is a reality that is uncaused. His existence is an existence that is uncaused. That's what we mean when we say God. Now, notice until this particular point that we get to see that everything that God created, He spoke. He spoke. Now, that means that everything was created from the sound of God, in the sound of God, through the sound of God, and exists through that very sound from which it came from. What that tells us is that everything exists in a state of frequency, or that everything is sound, everything is frequency. And as a result of that, everything from what you've talked about is produced from the frequency of God, which tells you also that God exists in a frequency. So when we are also talking about God, we are also referring to the frequency of frequency. The frequency of frequency, that is to say, the frequency that has produced every other particular frequency. Now, when you get to understand that, one thing you get to comprehend about the person and the being of God, being that He produced reality, that tells us that He is outside reality, but not that He is not involved in reality, because the Bible tells us in the book of Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3 that He upholds everything through His powerful word. So deism, we get to see that deism, the belief that God created creation and then He just left it to function according to its own laws, and that He's not involved in creation, rather that He's allowing creation to take its course, is actually not true according to Hebrews 1:3. So you get to see that God, even now, He is very active in creation. He's very active in creation. He is working even now. And the most amazing thing we have to understand about the works of God, and creation is a work of God, they're from the understanding of God, because a work is from understanding, through understanding, in understanding, and to understanding. What you have to understand is that now He is working. The way you find Jesus said somewhere in the book of John chapter 6, that my Father has been working from the beginning, and even now He is still working. Means you understand that the work that God produces, according to Genesis 1:31, it is a work that is very good. So even now, God is working for your good and for my good. But now I want us to notice something interesting. If he is working for the good and what he produces is good, then he is the good of good. He is what it means to be good, the very epitome of that particular word. That word good finds its fullest expression in the person of God. The good that everything possesses is produced by God, but the goodness of God is not produced by anything. He is good in and of himself. Now, we also have to understand as we wind up that everything that we've talked about in the sense of that which was produced by God, and even when the Bible begins, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, you get to see that we've talked about God being the reality of reality. We've talked about God being the mind of mind and so forth as it pertains to the faculties of mind. Then we also have to grasp and understand something, that the term God is not a name, rather it is a title, because, and it's a title because it's saying that God is the reality of reality, that God is the being of beings, being that it is God that has produced beings, then he is therefore a being. Having the ability to produce being means that he is a being, because you gotta understand, it takes mind to produce mind. It takes mind to produce mind. So, and it is beings that have mind. So God is the being of being. So when we are talking about God, we are meaning the supreme being, the supreme reality or prime reality, the understanding of understanding, all of these things being attributes that are therefore inherent in him as a result of association with what he has produced. So God is an associative term. It's an associative term. It's a term that joins God with what he has produced. It is a term that joins God with what he has produced. And that tells you something very fascinating. Before there were beings, God was still a supreme being. He was a supreme being. But now supreme being means that there are other beings that are not supreme. So you get to see what I've said. It is a term that connects God to his creation. So that means something. Before God had created, he was not yet creator. He had the ability to create, but he had not yet created, and therefore he was not creator, though he had the ability to create in and of himself. And God created in eternity past. Now, what you have to understand is the following, that when we're saying we are looking at God, or we are looking to God, this is what we really mean. That we are looking to this being whose existence is exclusive. We are looking to this being who is an exclusive being, who is not affected by the things or matters that are happening on this earth, in the sense of they do not change who and what he is. Now, for a brief moment, just think about that. And that this God who works and produces the good, he is presently working to produce a good for you. Just think about that he has your good in mind, being that he produced you as good to produce that which is good as well. So think about that. And that this God is working for you and for your good. Well, I surely hope you've been blessed. I've really just kind of edited a lot of thoughts to just bind them into one thing and to cause them to just be produced through this video, so that the video doesn't take a lot of time. And I hope you've been blessed. If you have any questions, just feel free to hit me up. If there's something you didn't understand, just feel free to hit me up as well. God bless you so much.